Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for being here for the session. And actually the session will be, as we said already, about user stories as well. And I would like to start telling you something that I experienced, something that I saw with my eyes. It was like the middle of November 2014, and I had the chance to observe a very talented group of people working on a digital product. There was this client coming to this group of programmers asking for a product that needs to be delivered for Christmas, because they had plans and they want to release something, and this will happen on Christmas. And it was the middle of November. And you know what happened during those days just before Christmas, you know, that people want just to close the things and go for holidays and be with no ideas and completely relaxed. So everything was on a rush, because everybody was rushing for closing their things and closing the project and so on. And having another project that lands on your desk in the middle of November, I mean, it's hell. Nobody wants to have it. But since the client was actually a big client and the opportunity was actually a good opportunity, so management said, okay, we need to get it, no matter what. So they got developers and some designers, and they said, you know, let's make a team and do it. So we need to do it, and we need to do it in 3 weeks, because you know Christmas is not going to wait for us. So get in touch with the client, start talking, and get something done, because we need to do it. So, but also the client, I mean, also on the client side, they had not that much details about what they have to build, because they was on a rush as well. They was pretty busy, or also on their side. The only thing that they had, it was a vague idea, let's say, about how this project have to perform and how the user have to interact with this and what would be the, let's say, the final outcome. So they start talking. So they start asking questions like, how do we have to do this? How does things have to work? So they start actually having a lot of conversations. And when the client didn't have the answers, they start asking customers. So they got out of the building and they asked, you know, interviewing people and say, oh, what do you think about having this instead of that? Or what do you feel about this function? So they start gathering information, not just from the client, but also by the customer, by the actual customers of the thing. And this project, even if it was run in a rush, in just 3 weeks, with just few people that was not very highly motivated, let's say, because they was actually waiting for holiday time, it was great. It was delivered on time, and all the people that I interacted with that was really, really satisfied. And clients was actually, and the expectations from the client side were overwhelmed by the huge success that they had. And this product was actually also distributed for other markets and released for occasions like Ramadan and Chinese New Year. It was a great success. But after a couple of months, I had the chance to observe the same exact team of people working in another club for another client with pretty much the same kind of projects in terms of complexity, let's say. This time, the client was preparing a very detailed brief, a lot of documentation, making clear what it needs to be done and how the specifications that the platform needs. And this document was passed to a very talented product managers, a very experienced one, and they started negotiating, they started talking about this, they splitted all the requirements in actual user stories, and all those user stories was passed to a team of designers that was producing, let's say, a mock-up of the user interface. And this user interface was passed then a group of very good developers, and they start coding, and they started producing the actual application. But what happened? Well, after a few weeks, something was happening. You know, the client started complaining about the fact that they said that something needs to be included, but actually it wasn't for the development side. Project management starts to claim about the fact that they was not moving fast enough. Designers start to arguing with developers, saying that the design was not respected and the detail that they was expecting was not actually the one that they delivered. And developers actually find very, very late that a lot of the ideas that was imagined at the beginning was actually unfeasible. So even if they had everything that was in their mind for accomplish brilliantly this project at the beginning, the project actually was a mess. And at the end, it was let's say it was delivered with a lot of delay and was requiring more budget than was prevented at the beginning. And actually, it was actually a very bad thing. It forced people to work even on Saturdays, which is actually, I mean, unbelievable. But this is actually not the worst things that happened. Because, I mean, the project was launched, was delivered, was properly marketed, was distributed to several markets. And after a while, I mean, we had the chance of measuring how many people was actually interacting with the platform as we thought at the beginning. Who guess how many people it was? 3 people. So all those efforts, all those people that was working so hard, made a very complex project that at the end was used by 3 people. So I started wondering actually, and I said, why this team, the same exact person, people that was actually accomplishing the first project very, very brilliantly, performed that bad, when actually they had everything in place, when actually they have all the time and the resources that they asked, and why they actually made a great result when they was under pressure. So those are actually very interesting questions. And I started investigating on it. But before getting into my discoveries, I would like to know each other a little bit more. So this is me. My name is Matteo Cavucci. I'm Italian, as you see, and I'm living in Berlin, Germany, where I'm working for this company called ThoughtWorks, which is a consultancy company, and probably you know it because of Martin Fowler, which is a very important member of our community, and other brilliant people that works here. Basically, we are providing consultancy to enterprise and other kind of big companies that wants to get into the digital market. And we are doing it in a very, let's say, unique way, because we are keeping an eye on social and economical justice. So we want to make an impact, and we want to get the world, we want to make the world a better place, as we used to say, in different ways. So, actually, a little bit of me, because, I mean, you don't know me, and you probably was asking, who's this guy that's speaking here? So I would like to give you a little bit of information about my background. So I started as a kid very passionate about stories, because I started playing with video games, and every video game there is actually a story inside. And actually I really liked reading books and magazines. So when I was a teenager, it was actually very natural for me getting into the media, let's say the media industry, and playing with words and becoming a journalist. So I started doing reports and stuff like that, and collaborating with newspapers and so. But media industry and journalism in general was having a very big crisis, even at the late 90s. And when I started realizing that the whole industry was changing, I thought that probably was a great idea going back on my technology roots and starting playing with computers and internet. It was actually the tool that was emerging at the time. And what I learned on my career so far is actually that in our life we have big challenges, and instead of refusing that, pushing back, saying, oh, we used to do like this, I mean, let's keep doing as we do, we need to embrace and we need to change, because in every challenge there are opportunities. And actually letting people express themselves, so step out a little bit and let other people take the stage and tell their stories, is actually better than be the middleman between you and the actual facts. What about you? I mean, it's a very nice crowd, and we already know that you are pretty familiar with user stories, but I would like to know actually how many people likes the way are they using user stories? 1, great. Yes, because user story is not a simple thing. And let me say something about the thing that we are going to see and to discover today. So we are going to get into the definition of user story, but keeping the focus on the actual power that is actually hidden inside the concept of user story. And we are also see why sometimes user stories are actually bringing something, a value, which is bigger than be just requirement. And how can we make it better? How can we make those approach of user story really effective in our companies and in our everyday job? So let's start from here. Let's start about the definition, and let's start to see where user stories are coming from. So they're basically coming from the intuition of this guy, which is Kent Beck. And he was including this idea of user stories in his framework called extreme programming. I think that you are pretty familiar with this. And what he thought, it was this idea of telling what the software should do using natural language. So instead of relying on something complicated that has to describe how the software has to work in terms of numbers and metrics, he said we should use stories and natural narratives, because there's actually something very powerful. And instead of relying on book or requirements, that contains a lot of details, and sometimes those details got lost. We need to stand on the idea that ideas needs to be transmitted from person to person, and they actually work in the best way as possible. And sometimes, writing down a document and passing a document is not the best way to transmit those ideas. And we have plenty of examples that are actually all around us. Because, if you have to imagine a case, well, there are a lot of those things that happens in our everyday life. For example, imagine this, right? Imagine somebody that is ordering a cake and, is asking for, could you make like, okay, this is for my 30-year birthday, so let's make a great 30 with stars and sprinkles around it. That's what you get, right? This is what was on the sheet. And what was on the order here was like, oh, please be sure that Ashley will be spelled with 2 E's. Because, my name is like this. Or like this. This is a great attempt of doing art direction on the phone. Like, so you can imagine those guy calling and says, you know what? In green, happy birthday. And in red, Megan. That's it, right? This is a document. This is, let's say, a way of specifying something. And this is actually the actual result. And this is actually my favorite one. Somebody that calls and say, oh, you know what do you want on a cake? Well, just balloon, please, just balloon. That's it, right? And even those things look silly, they are actually telling us that communication between individuals is a very hard thing, and it's not something that we could actually treat like a second level of skills. This is actually something that we have to practice, because this is actually depends a lot of the impact that we can make on people. And this is the key of this idea of considering documents and things that are shared between people, like I shared you a document, or you will find it on Google Docs, or go to our intranet, and we are assuming that those documents are actually representing a shared understanding, so something that actually people have the same idea in mind. And this is actually could lead to some unexpected results. So even if you have a document, doesn't mean that you have the same idea. And why user stories are different? Why user stories actually has more power than normal requirements? Because inside a user story, there is a story. And our brains, our minds, are actually designed to get stories and reproduce it very, very effective. So stories was the primary knowledge management tool since the beginning of humanity. So you can imagine, the early days of humanity, of people around, a fire, telling stories about the things that they did and try to spread the knowledge, just using words and telling what happened. And our brains are actually evolved from those days and maturated a way of interacting with stories, which is actually very, very brilliant. Because, we can get a lot of information, a lot of context, and we can have a very complex idea, even from a very small fragment. We saw this morning, like Dave in his presentation, that was showing those graffiti, from prehistorical ages. We have the same idea on our mind working. Because if I'm showing you this picture, what those guys are doing? Sorry? A selfie, you say? Look it closer. What do you...
Picture.
Huh?
Watching picture.
Watching picture, yes, watching picture. I mean, what kind of people are they? Grandparents, yes. And what kind of picture are they looking at? Grandchild, exactly. Probably in this image, there is a story. There is a story of a couple of elderly, I don't know, the granddad and the grandma looking at, grandson's pictures. And this is actually triggers a lot of things in our brain, right? We can actually get a full landscape of things that happens behind this picture, and actually we can actually construct the things that happen later. So we can actually see a bigger picture starting from a very small fragment of information, which is actually just this picture. And also, have you noticed another thing? The fact that when you are presenting stories to people, people tend to discuss. So people actually start questioning each other and thinking about alternate sense. This is actually pretty evident when you're going, for example, for movie theaters. And after the movie theater, you will see all the people going off from the theater, and they are actually chatting, about the movie. So they said like, oh, you know what, that guy was really silly. He died on the first scene. And oh no, I mean, he died because he was designed to be like this. So they are interacting. So they are actually telling something on top of the stories, because stories are great for having those kind of interactions. And this idea of using stories in a professional background, in a professional landscape, was actually a great idea. And the framework that also Matteo was referring at, so to consider a user story as a card, but as well as a conversation, so something that allows people to discuss, and as well as a confirmation, so something that could be checked for the effectiveness. It's a great idea that made a lot of, improvement in the way we are working. But when normally I'm going to clients and they're showing me the way they're working and how they're interacting with how they're managing their time and their work, what I see is this, right? I see a card on a wall. So they have plenty of cards. They have very large walls, and if I see closer, if I get closer to this card, I can say this, that instead of being a story, this is actually a requirement. So instead of being something that needs to be discussed and actually has to be the most effective way for transmitting ideas, is actually just another way to tell somebody else what needs to be done. So, and why you need a story for doing this, right? Why you just say, oh, you know what, we need to implement this. You know why, we need a button here. You know what, we need to, print this page. Because those things doesn't work. So, just telling people what they have to do, we saw before with cakes, doesn't work. And the primary way this is not working, the primary reason is the fact that we are moving from let's say, a way of managing work that we inherited from an industrial way, from industrial, let's say, mindset, to something different. So in the industrial way, what you have a lot of people doing repetitive actions because they are working on these factories, on the assembly line. So they have to do the same thing over and over again. They normally don't have so much education. And, there is a strict separation between people that are deciding what needs to be done and people that are actually doing the job. They are actually acting. And these things doesn't happen in our landscape, in our digital landscape, because we are living in a post-industrial market, in industry. And what we have high-trained people, so very good of solving problem using creative approach. So instead of be prescriptive, instead to have people that will decide what needs to be done, we need to empower those people to get their best, to get those solutions that are really effective and produces impact. Because they are experts. They know a lot of things. If you think about developers or your colleagues in general, you will see very, very high-skilled people. They are not stupid. They are very good. And what actually is behind their motivation is be autonomous or picking the right solutions to implement the goal that they have, be a master of the craft that they want to make, they want to practice, and feel the purpose. So people that works in this industry wants to know why they are doing something. And this is actually a great trigger for them because, I mean, when you know about the context, when you know about the big picture, you can take the best decisions. And actually, if you see software, you will see that software is just a decision stuck on top of the other, on top of the other. It's just making decisions at any level, from the top manager down to the new developer. They are making decisions, and feeling the purpose of this is a great, great driver. And actually, is the best way how to react of market. Because, I mean, as Faris was saying before, we are working in a market where everything is changing, and it's about disrupt or be disrupted. And the best way to react on this landscape made about uncertain is actually allowing people to take their decisions on the field. And if you think that this is actually a crazy thing, you should talk about with somebody coming from the army, that they have a huge experience of having, let's say, addressing critical situations on the field. And you will see that those people that works in the army, they are shifting from making orders, they are very detailed, they are very actually specifying everything that people have to do in the field, to something that is called like this. It's called commander's intent. There is just, a proposition that tells about the decided state and set an initial goal for allowing people to adapt their strategies on the field and get the best results at the end of their operation. And if you still think that this is a crazy idea, probably it's because moving out from this culture of control and prediction is actually a very hard thing. I mean, our industry now, our clients and probably the companies we are working at, they are moving from an industrial way of conducting the job to a post-industrial one. And they are keeping tools, and people are coming from management school having tools that are actually explaining how to manage a company using this kind of prediction, using tools. They are coming from the industrial way of considering the jobs. So you will see something like this. You will see a lot of details. And if you see user stories that their guys are producing, you will see this. You will see something that looks like a user story. And then you will see a lot of requirements here. A lot of requirements here that are actually specifying very, very, very deep the things that you have to do. And at the same time, you will see a lot of those guys, they are doing the job of splitting the big goal, the big epic, in smaller stories. They are just sitting alone. They are just doing this job alone. And even if those are very good guys, sometimes they don't have the full domain knowledge, because there is no such a thing like a domain expert. There are domain experts, because many people know different parts of the domain. And where actually together, they actually can bring a lot of value on the table. What you have actually, when you have a guy that actually is writing down stories, you have a situation like this, right? So this guy has this idea in mind, and they said, we agree, yes, we are. We are on the same page, right? We start working. But if they start talking and they start representing their ideas, what they have in mind, you will see that they have very different things. And when they start to interacting, at the end, they will have something that is more valuable than the initial idea. And this is actually does to a very interesting thing. The fact that people here produced a new idea that was not demanded by the client. So the client was coming with a requirement, a vision, and they produced something that is slightly different. Because sometimes clients or stakeholders in general, they don't have all the answers to all the questions. And product teams should be responsible of producing the most effective thing. So they are the experts. They are in charge of doing effective solutions. So let me go fast. User stories was not invented for allowing stakeholders to command what needs to be done, but actually a good tool that allows people to think about requirements differently. So they are not just lightweight requirements. They are a completely different way of transmitting ideas. And how can we make it better? Well, there are a lot of ways. Matteo already presented a lot of good approaches. But I would like to keep the attention once again on the importance of including people. So the importance of having different people that are talking each other when the user stories are defined. Because when you are moving from an handover, so producing a document, to a way of including people and having discussions on the things that needs to be done, you will get a lot of good options. So you will start exploring options and new product ideas, and you will get a very important thing, which is actually the rework that will be minimized. So you will target errors and possible, let's say, bottlenecks at the very beginning of the process. And you will have a situation like this, because when I'm saying that people have to talk, it doesn't mean that they have to talk freely. They have to talk, they have to learn how to talk, and they have to learn actually how they have tools, and they will develop tools for make those discussions more efficient at every iterations. And another thing that normally I see to many people is the fact that people are sticking a lot with the format. As a user, I want to do this, so that, which is a great, is a great conversation started. But we don't have to be, super strict on the format, because sometimes instead of relying on the formats and filling the blanks, we need to start telling stories, because user stories are stories. And if the template doesn't help us, we can use another one. Like, in order to accomplish this people needs to do this. This is still a story. This is still containing the same thing, but it's not a template anymore. Because inside stories, you will see that cards are actually placeholders for the discussion, so we are just referring to something that we discussed, so are not so important. And if a story is a story, you will see very clearly that something doesn't work if it's obvious, or if the story, as Matteo was showing before, are not actually effective. And of course, you will start avoiding feature requests, and you will start talking from the user point of view. So you will put yourself on user shoes instead of defining what we have to do from the system point of view. For example, this card. This card is great because this is actually, kanji. Great. So that says China. And this card is actually very effective to represent the Chinese version of the website that we need to deliver by the end of the month. And this is something that I found on Twitter some days ago. It's actually not super clear, but says, as a software developer, I'm doing it wrong because I think this template is a replacement for talking to people. And another thing that I noticed many times here today is the fact that we are referring to stories as a short stories. Great, but why short? Because stories, at the end, they are experiments. So they are something that we are pushing on the market, and we'll see how people react. So stories, not just because they are short, they are short amount of work, because they will actually help us to move from prediction-based plans to something that could be reactive, to something that is based by hypotheses and the evaluation of those hypotheses. And they could be right or wrong, and that's why they are small. Because if they are small, if they are wrong, the company will not blow up. They will survive, because they will be short enough to be survival experiments. And we are moving from learning, from a success definition that comes from the accomplishment task, like I did this and done, great, to something that says how much we learned. Okay, and another thing, the last thing I would like to say is, please don't rely on the average user. Don't say as a user, because if you are going to say as a user I want to do this, as a user I want to do that, as a user this and this, we will see this mythical user that can do everything. I mean, there is no such a thing like the average user. There are actual people, and we have to talk about actual people to get something that actually provides context. Because when we say as a user, we're actually injecting context in our stories, and this is a great thing. It's like the image that we said. It helps a lot people to get the full picture. And I believe that user stories are a great tool for balancing disciplined execution, so something that are effective from a business side, and at the same time fostering creativity and innovation. And this is great because it's actually based on the main idea of including people and make them discussing. Because there is this Brazilian proverb that says, if you're dreaming alone, it's just a dream, but if you're dreaming with other people, it's the beginning of a new reality. So, thank you very much. If you want to get more, those are books that I would really recommend.
This one for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.